Have you ever wondered why, after everything you've been through with God, you now feel distant from Him? That connection, that fire, that intimacy? Now, everything seems lost. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why does God feel so distant? Did I do something wrong? Or even, has He forgotten me? Frustration and spiritual exhaustion have consumed you, haven't they? You've prayed, sought signs, asked for answers. Yet silence seems to be the only thing you receive. If you're feeling this way, let me assure you, you're not alone. I understand your pain, and that's exactly why I'm here, to tell you something that might surprise you. The distance you feel doesn't mean God has abandoned you. Rather, He's guiding you along a deep path of spiritual transformation and maturity. You're not the only one to feel like this. In the Old Testament, we find Elijah, a man of faith who, after witnessing great miracles from God, found himself fleeing and hiding in a cave. He was exhausted, disillusioned, and felt completely alone. But the most surprising thing is that God didn't respond to Elijah with thunder, lightning, or any other powerful sign. No, God replied with a soft and calm voice, asking, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 1 Kings 19:9. Sometimes God's silence doesn't signify His absence, but rather His subtle and intimate presence. The silence you're experiencing right now might actually be God's way of calling you into a deeper relationship where He fully knows you, and yet still chooses to walk by your side. Have you ever felt like that? Do you know those moments when you pray with all your heart, but heaven seems to be closed? Perhaps, just like Elijah, you're being called to trust that God is closer than you imagine. Did you know that God's silence can actually be one of the most powerful forms of preparation? Let's look at Habakkuk, a prophet who found himself facing injustice so great that his heart couldn't understand. He cried out, "How long, Lord? Must I call for help, but you do not listen?" Habakkuk 1:2. He was questioning God about the suffering, about pain, and about God's apparent indifference. But God didn't give him an immediate answer. It wasn't the response Habakkuk expected, but it was exactly what he needed. God showed him that the process of waiting was precisely what would prepare him for a greater answer, a deeper vision of His plan. And so Habakkuk learned that sometimes God allows silence to mature us, to prepare our hearts to understand His greatness and faithfulness. Have you also felt like Habakkuk, questioning the reason for your pain and waiting for a response that never seems to come? This silence might actually be the necessary preparation for a greater purpose in your life. He is not ignoring you. He is shaping you. Seems contradictory, doesn't it? God uses silence to teach us to trust Him more deeply. Let's talk again about Elijah, a great prophet of God who experienced incredible miracles. He defeated the prophets of Baal with God's strength, but after that victory found himself fleeing to a cave, exhausted and disillusioned. He even asked to die, saying, "I've had enough. Take my life." 1 Kings 19:4. Elijah, in his most difficult moment, felt that God had abandoned him. But something incredible happened. God did not manifest Himself in a grand way with thunder or fire, as Elijah expected. Instead, God came to him softly in a gentle breeze. 1 Kings 19:12. This teaches us something fundamental. Often, God does not come in great spectacles, but in quietness, in silence, in small gestures of love and care. He was there the whole time, not in the storm, but in the quiet peace that brings immense comfort. Are you ready to hear God's voice in the gentle breeze, in the silence that so often feels empty? The Bible is full of moments of pain, but also of profound trust in God. One of the most powerful examples comes from Habakkuk, who openly questioned, "How long, Lord? Must I call for help, but you do not listen?" Habakkuk 1:2. Habakkuk wasn't asking for easy answers. He questioned why God allowed suffering and injustice to continue. Maybe you also feel this way, asking, "God, why doesn't the pain end? Why don't you answer?" God's response to Habakkuk wasn't immediate, and that's something hard to understand. Often we become frustrated because we expect God to speak clearly and directly, but He knows the perfect moment to reveal Himself. Sometimes He lets us wait because waiting prepares our hearts for something much greater. God, in His silence, is not absent. He is working behind the scenes, shaping patience and trust within us, because He knows these elements are essential for our spiritual transformation. Waiting isn't empty. It is, in fact, a moment of profound growth in our faith. Then we have the story of Job, a man who endured unimaginable losses. He lost everything he had, his health, his children, his wealth. He was in deep anguish, questioning throughout his suffering whether God had abandoned him. Why was I born? Just to suffer? He didn't understand, and how could he? His pain was so immense, so overwhelming. If you've ever felt like this, you know how it is to look up to the heavens and ask, God, where are you? Why is this happening to me? But what Job didn't know, and what he eventually discovered, was that his suffering wasn't punishment. His pain was the key to a deeper revelation of God. When God finally answered, Job, He didn't give simple explanations. Instead, He revealed the greatness of His power and wisdom, showing that often what we don't understand now is part of a much bigger plan. Job had a personal encounter with God that transformed him. He saw that God's greatness isn't measured by circumstances, but by the depth of relationship we can have with Him, even amidst suffering. His faith was refined, and he encountered a God who never abandoned him, even when the silence seemed deafening. Now, you might be thinking, but what does all this mean for me? If God seemed distant to them, what makes me think He's not distant from me as well? The truth is, God's silence doesn't mean He has abandoned us. In fact, He often uses silence as a tool to mature our faith. Sometimes what seems like an absence of response is actually an opportunity to deepen our trust in Him. Silence challenges us to look inside ourselves and examine what we're truly seeking in our relationship with God. He asks us to pause and reflect. Am I seeking God for who He is, or only for what He can give me? God's silence leads us into a place where we must learn to trust Him, even without seeing or understanding what's happening around us. It's in this silence that our faith is forged, our dependence is shaped, and a deeper relationship with God begins to be built. In Isaiah 40:31, the Bible tells us, But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Here, God assures us that waiting in His silence is not empty. On the contrary, it's a process of transformation, a renewal occurring within us while we wait. Often we feel stuck, as if nothing is happening. But it's in the silence that God strengthens us for what's coming next. He's preparing us for something greater, something we perhaps can't fully comprehend yet. Did you know that while you wait, God is working within you? He isn't merely waiting for you to endure. He's empowering you for a stronger, more confident, more faith-filled future. God's silence is not an end. It's the means to a new beginning. He's shaping you, even when you can't see it. Sometimes, waiting can be one of life's hardest challenges. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes, what God is doing, or how much longer we'll have to wait. It feels like the silence will never end. But what if I told you that this waiting has a profound purpose? In 1 Peter 5:10, the Bible reminds us, And the God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will Himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. God uses these silent moments to perfect us, strengthen our faith, and ground our trust in Him. God's silence isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity. He is shaping your character, strengthening your faith, and preparing you for what's to come. If you still don't understand the reason for your waiting, trust that it's not without purpose. Every second of silence is being used by God to build something remarkable inside of you. I know what you're thinking. If God really loved me, He would answer me now. He would speak to me now. the pain you feel deep within your soul, the loneliness that never seems to fade. These feelings are as real as the air you breathe. But I need to tell you something important. God's silence is not a sign of rejection. On the contrary, it's proof of His love and trust in you. In Isaiah 40:31 we read, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Sometimes God calls us to wait so we can renew our strength in Him. God's silence doesn't mean He's forgotten you. He's molding you, strengthening your faith, and preparing you for a future closer to Him than ever before. I understand that waiting is hard. It's painful to look at the horizon and not see God's response coming. It's challenging to pray and feel as if your words disappear into thin air. But what if I told you that during this period of waiting, God is working profoundly in your life? When you feel heaven is silent, it might be because God is preparing something greater than you could imagine. Do you remember Habakkuk? He asked God, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen?" Habakkuk 1:2. But God, in His wisdom, knew that the wait was not punishment, but preparation for something incredible that would come later. Waiting can be painful, but it teaches us to trust God, not through immediate answers, but through confidence in what He's doing behind the scenes of our lives. Waiting refines our faith and shapes our character. I know you're tired of waiting, and I understand that doubt keeps creeping into your mind. God's silence might feel like a punishment, but what if I told you it's actually an invitation? An invitation to trust more deeply, to surrender to the process He is creating in your life. Silence is not absence. It's a quiet presence working on something you can't yet see. God is shaping something new inside you, something stronger, more resilient, more like Him. Even when everything feels empty and you can't sense God's presence, the truth is, He's closer than ever. Silence is the space where transformation happens. It's when you're challenged to move forward without clear answers, trusting that what God has planned for you is far greater than what you can understand right now. I know the pain you feel seems unbearable sometimes. You wonder if this pain will ever end. The silence surrounding you seems to swallow your words, your prayers, and you feel as if you're talking to a wall. But the truth is, God's silence doesn't mean He isn't listening. Often silence is the place where transformation happens. You're being prepared for something greater, something that can only be revealed after passing through this season. What you're experiencing is not the end. It's a process. And even though you may not understand it right now, know that God is working within you on your patience, your faith, and your trust. He never abandons you, even when heaven seems silent. Remember, the greatest miracles often happen during the quietest moments, when you choose to continue even without seeing immediate answers. Sometimes, pain feels stronger than hope. The waiting seems long, endless, and you feel stuck. But here's the truth you might need to hear today. What you're going through right now is shaping you for something greater. God hasn't placed you in this moment to make you suffer, but to strengthen you. Sometimes we must go through the fire to be refined, and fire isn't a comfortable place. Yet it's necessary for you to become stronger, more resilient, and closer to God. The waiting, the silence, all of this has a purpose. It's not punishment, it's refinement. Remember that God's greatest works often emerge when it seems there are no answers. If you're going through this, if you're waiting, know that it's during this wait that your faith will be strengthened, and in this pain, you'll discover your strength. Have you ever thought that perhaps God's silence isn't a sign of absence, but of closeness? Often, we associate silence with abandonment, neglect, loneliness. But what if God is closer to you than ever before? Silence can be the space where God works most deeply. When He doesn't respond with audible words, it's because He's doing something in you that words can't reach. Sometimes in silence, He teaches us to trust more completely, to wait more patiently, to walk with Him without needing a sign every step of the way. Silence is an opportunity to cultivate a stronger faith, a faith that doesn't depend on what we see or hear, but on absolute trust in who He is. In the silence, God is close, perhaps closer than you can imagine. He hears you, He sees your tears, and He knows the pain you carry. Silence doesn't mean He isn't working. On the contrary, it's proof He's working in ways you can't yet see. What you need to understand today is that the process of waiting isn't punishment, it's preparation. Every moment of silence, every day that passes without an answer, is building something in you that you can't yet see. You're being shaped, strengthened, purified. Sometimes what God is doing isn't immediate relief, but deep internal work, so that when the answer finally comes, you'll be ready to receive it with a transformed heart. Don't give up in the waiting. Don't give up in the pain. God hasn't abandoned you. He's using this silence to prepare you for something greater than you ever imagined. God's silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. It's where your faith is refined, where your character is forged, where you're becoming the person God always knew you could be. So, instead of asking why He isn't answering, ask yourself, what is God teaching me through this silence? How can I grow while I wait? Sometimes life takes us to dark places where words of encouragement feel empty and the future seems uncertain. But even in those moments, God is with us. He hasn't disappeared. He's quietly waiting for the moment when His plan will be revealed. Silence isn't a sign of absence. It's a sign of trust. God is working within you, even when you can't see it. He is shaping your life in ways you can't yet understand, but it will all become clear at the right time. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of despair is seen by Him. You're not alone in this desert, and transformation is about to happen. All you need to do is keep going. When you feel you're on the verge of collapse, unsure where to turn, remember, God's silence isn't abandonment, it's preparation. He's preparing your heart for something greater, something stronger, something deeper. The waiting you feel right now isn't punishment. It's not rejection. God is building your faith. He is refining your spirit for the journey ahead. The desert may seem dry and lifeless, but it's in deserts that roots grow deep. Your faith is growing stronger than you realize, and the answer you've been longing for is closer than it seems. Don't give up. Sometimes you might wonder, will this pain ever really pass? Will I be able to endure it until the end? I know waiting can be difficult, and God's silence can feel incomprehensible. But remember, heaven isn't silent. God is working. He's preparing your future, transforming what seems like nothing but pain into something that will strengthen you and bring you to a place where your faith will be unshakable. This is God's purpose for your life, to turn this pain into a firm foundation where you'll see His hand at work in everything. When you look back, you'll see that you weren't abandoned. You were shaped. Now, look at where you are today. How do you feel after reflecting on all of this? You've already seen that. God's silence isn't a sign of abandonment, but evidence of something deeper happening within you. God isn't silent because He doesn't care. He's silent because He's molding you for something greater. The waiting process, as painful as it is preparing you for a higher level of faith and trust. And that's the greatest gift He can give you. Every second you endure, every day you wait without seeing answers, every moment you choose to trust, each one is a step further in your spiritual maturity. I know the pain is real. I know the doubts are heavy, but it's here, in this silent space, that your faith will be strengthened. At the end of this journey, you will be stronger, more equipped, and more prepared to fulfill the purpose God has for you. And if you haven't seen it yet, let me remind you, God's silence is your opportunity for transformation. The waiting isn't in vain. It's the key to change, to a deeper relationship with Him. Now, I want you to make a decision. Don't let the silence distance you from God. Let it draw you closer to Him. If you feel that this message spoke to your heart, I invite you to share in the comments, God, I choose to trust you, even in the silence. And if this touched your soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week we'll have more messages that can change your life and help strengthen your spiritual walk. You're not alone. God is with you, and He will take you further. Don't give up.